Good afternoon, everyone. I am Tom. I'm a historian of collecting based at the University of Durham, and I'm delighted for the opportunity to moderate this session on the theme of returning home, looking at collections which have gone back to their original contexts. Now, this kind of concept, the sort of reconstructive exhibition, is enjoying a real vogue at the moment. You might think of the Charles I show at the Royal Academy recently, or indeed the Paston's Treasure that was at Norwich. Further afield, the Campana show at the Louvre last year, or Degenerate Art at Dusseldorf, or even the Orléans collection in New Orleans, which is maybe a little bit more kind of improbable. But I think that these kind of reconstructions are particularly resonant when they go back to settings and buildings that were designed for them. And our very distinguished panel today are all people who've set kind of benchmarks of excellence in this field. Thierry Morel was the curator behind the spectacular Houghton Revisited, which quite rightly won the award for Exhibition of the Year from Apollo in 2013, which sort of reunited some of the collections of Robert Walpole that had been sold to Russia and brought back to his Norfolk seat. Silvia Davoli, who is research curator at Strawberry Hill and did a brilliant job sort of reconstructing the fate of objects that had been in Horace Walpole's collection that were then sold in the Walpole sale in 1842 and then came back to Twickenham. And finally, Toto Rossi, who is working at the Palazzo Grimani to reassemble the collections of the 16th century Grimani family, especially their collection of antique sculptures. So I'm very grateful to all of you for coming to speak to us today. I'm going to ask each of the panelists at the beginning to pick a couple of slides and say something about the collections that they were trying to reconstitute and reassemble. Silvia, you're up first.
So, yes, in 2002 was created a trust in Twickenham, the Strawberry Hill Trust, and the mission of the trust was to restore Strawberry Hill and to open it to the wider public. And eventually the house was opened to the public in 2010, but unfortunately the house was, the Gothic castle was an empty shell. In fact, the collection, as mentioned by Thomas before, was auctioned in 1842. The sale lasted something like 23 days, and more than 60,000 objects were sold at auction. And this is why, 5 years ago, I was appointed as the research curator of Strawberry Hill in order to retrace the lost collection. And what is really impressive about the Strawberry Hill collection is that it is one of the most well-documented collection ever. Walpole left us with two descriptions, one published in 1774 and the other one 10 years later, and a wealth of drawings depicting exactly how the rooms at Strawberry Hill looked like in the 80s, 70s. This is a design by Edward Edwards, but there were many others produced by an artist called John Carter. In any case, for my job, this was crucial. I mean, together with the sale catalogue produced in 1842, the fact that I had, thanks to these drawings, the possibility to visualize what I was looking for was really very important. So basically, thanks to my research, during the last 5 years, I was able to retrace something like 150 objects, without mentioning that before me there were generations of art historians working on Horace Walpole, the first British art historians. So the importance of this collection is not only about the Neo-Gothic or the Gothic revival, but it's also that Walpole, the creator of the collection, was the first art historian, and the collection somehow reflects its importance. And so thanks to the research and thanks to the documentation Walpole produced, Walpole was obsessed with the idea that one day the house and the collection would have eventually been separated. So the combination of these two events led the trust to find and invest a lot of money in the recreation of Strawberry Hill and the reunification of the collection with the house. For once, I mean, I think it was the only opportunity to see the house and the collection back together. So yes, I mean, it was really a huge effort.
Great.
Yes, this was to show you more or less. I mean, in terms of logistic effort, obviously it was very difficult, but we will talk about that later. I mean, there were, obviously these objects are now scattered to the four corners of the world, so the main effort was to actually borrow objects from so many lenders, more than 50. And because in terms of display, as you see, we were trying as much as possible to respect Walpole vision and Walpole indication. So I think that the biggest challenge was really to try as much to be respectful of Walpole vision.
Toto, I have a slide for you.
Yes. No, in my case, it's quite similar to your case, but with different kind of difficult to try to put this together. In this case, it's a very well-known collection of Roman and Greek statues that collected by Patriarch Giovanni Grimani in the middle of 16th century. And not only he collected antiquity, that was something quite rare in Venice to have antiquity. Venice is one of the few, let's say, city in Italy without archaeological things. Venice is an early Middle Age city from a lagoon with no Roman ruins. So his idea to collect was even more original than other collection in Venice, quite unique. And the idea to have his own Wunderkammer, like the Duke of Este, or like, the Renaissance prince in Medicis, or in Urbino, is exactly that. And so not only was a collector, but he was also like the one who made let's say, the restylish of his own house. So we don't know the names of the architect who restored the palazzo at this time. Of course, it's an influence of Palladio, because he was very good friend with the Grimani. But when Grimani died in 1593, he left the best pieces of the collection to the Republic of Venice. So the statues went out of these Wunderkammer marble rooms in 1594, and they end up to the Biblioteca Marciana in San Marco Square. They stay there until Napoleon, and Napoleon took some pieces in France at the Louvre, and some other that were distributed between the Doge's Palace and later in the Archaeological Museum. They were recently again in the main room of the Marciana, but I heard 2 years ago that they wanted to close this room because the ceiling by Titian is falling apart. And when I heard that, I run a foundation, by the way, who raised money for the city of Venice called Venetian Hermitage. So normally I'm not a curator of exhibition, it's my first exhibition. But the idea to see all the statues in the storage for 2 years, and thank God with the Acqua Alta that we have last week, thank God they were not in the storage. So the idea to bring them in 600-meter distance from San Marco Square to Palazzo Grimani, and have them exactly where they were, because the room is perfect. I mean, there's few alterations on the architectural of the room. You can see, like, this is now, and the slide, the following one, you can check. So this was the room until last May. So there is some little alteration. They open a niche to make a hole for a door, but this was the room before the sculptures arrived. So we have all the indication about it. We just rebuilt 2 niches, but the difficult was to make peace with 2 state museums, because they all think that they own the object like a private property. So it was quite difficult to deal with them for 600 meters and few boats of transport. But the result is amazing. And also Palazzo Grimani was bought by the state 20 years ago, was restored and opened to the public 9 years ago, but it's a beautiful empty box. So in this case, my work is not only about put back the collection, but also promote an existent museum that doesn't make any good number of tourists. So we pass from 12,000 people a year, and now, normally, in the last 9 years, and now from May 10 until now, we have 40,000 people. Wow. So,
which is very similar to the
Strumiel
situation.
So finally, people go to Palazzo Grimani.
Was a way to attract people to see the museum.
What was the increase for Houghton? Do you know, Thierry?
It was from 16,000 to 125,000.
You win. Thierry, do you want to say a little bit about your slides? Sorry, there we go.
So here's a view of the common part. So well, the Houghton case, well, he was Sir Robert Walpole was Horace's father, and also a great collector. In his case, he used to have his collection in Downing Street, which number 10 Downing Street, which used to be his house. When he retired, withdrew from politics, he decided to give the house back to the Crown and had Houghton built on his estate. And for that, he asked the best architects at the time. And William Kent was in charge of the interiors. And William Kent, having also done some work at number 10, knew the collection very well. And what's extraordinary about the collection of Walpole is that the designer or the architect had the collection already at hand before building or designing the house. So they thought even more carefully about the placing, location of each and every single painting in the house. And so when I was working for the Hermitage Foundation, I thought, well, what's extraordinary is the house has remained intact almost, apart from the collection, which was sold by the son of Sir Robert, who was a gambler, and had to sell the entire collection. The entire collection, the only person in Europe who could afford it really and was keen to have it was Catherine the Great. And so she paid a huge amount for it, £40,000, I think I remember. And so the whole collection went to Russia and became one of the I would say, the formed sort of the beginning of the Hermitage collection. So the collection remained for mostly at the Hermitage throughout the centuries, but that's it. Yeah. But I thought it would be, since we have the house in perfect condition, and also the furnishings, the furniture, the fire, the chimney pieces, and everything. How wonderful would it be to reunite the collection in its original setting, particularly because the setting had been designed for it. So embarking on a project like that took about 3 years and a lot of convincing from the Hermitage, but not only the Hermitage, because part of the collection had been dispersed throughout the centuries, notably during the Revolution and afterwards. So this, and then of course it led to Thierry that it would be nice also to bring some objects that were part of the collection. So like the collection of silver, for instance, some pieces came back for the exhibition. And it is true that when you place back the pictures where they originally were, they shine. So the last image, perhaps. And of course, it would have been wonderful to recreate the whole collection, but that would have been possible. But at least I think the exhibition sort of helped to understand, first of all, what the taste of Sir Robert, but also the quality of his collection, and also illustrate how the pictures and furnishings and architecture really are interdependent sometimes, and I would say sort of, yes, increase the beauty of each part. Yeah.
You've already started answering the question I was going to ask, Thierry, but these shows take a huge amount of cultural diplomacy, are very expensive, are very difficult to coordinate. If you had to say, in a very simple way, one or two things that you think these reconstructive exhibitions can reveal that makes them different from other kinds of exhibitions, what came out of doing this that you wouldn't otherwise have seen or been able to kind of know through books or through looking at the artworks in different contexts? What did it really reveal by bringing them back together? I mean, it's a question for all three of you. What happens when you put the Grimani pieces back in that space?
You have to answer.
Well, I think, first of all, the context is important for a work of art. I mean, when sometimes the works are created for a specific space. In this case, the collection was created and then the building created for it. the story. There's always people are interested in the public, always interested in storytelling, and I think just telling a story about a house, a collector, it makes it more personal. The public is always interested to say, oh, what did he like? What sort of taste did he have? Why did he buy this painting or this one? This is part of the human interest. We're interested to know why some works attract particular personalities. And then, yes, sorry, did you carry on?
Well, I think that's also an element that is very important in this reconstruction, this kind of reconstruction, is that it's, I mean, you perceive immediately themes and relations which normally, when transmitted by the written word, are obviously not simplified but organized in another way. So I think that what is really fascinating about this reconstruction is that you finally, I mean, the public can also perceive and understand ideas or aspects of taste that can be also contradictory. One example with Walpole was that he's the creator of the Gothic revival, but yes, he was also a collector of Roman antiquities, and house was packed with antiquities. So it's only through this kind of exhibition that is possible to explain or to communicate a concept that otherwise would be more difficult or would be limited to an elite, not an elite, I would say a niche of art historians. And this is, I think it's people like this kind also of in-depth analysis or knowledge.
The thing that struck me with the Strawberry Hill show is just how much Walpole was a European. I mean, and you actually did a great job of putting him in a sort of 18th century Republic of Letters rather than just a sort of English antiquarian. Yes. It was really about the kind of European networks as well.
Exactly, which was one of the aim of the exhibition as well, to show how much his taste was formed actually between France and Italy, of course. Yeah.
And then also the change of taste and the fact that those pictures were designed for palatial interiors. And I would say that Houghton is one of the most palatial and Italianesque sort of interiors in England, in Britain. And you can see that they work much better on walls richly adorned with damask than white walls. There's the lighting. And what's marvelous when you actually spend time when the pictures were there, is you could see that the light, the natural light, was really working in places where you didn't expect it to work. So obviously the architect had that in mind as well.
Didn't Kent introduce top lighting in some of the rooms as well, if I remember? There were sort of experiments
in
the
hall, yes. Yeah. But mostly sort of side, sort of on the side, sort of windows. And sconces, of course.
Toto, what about the Grimanis, in the sense that that Tribuna room, was that conceived with the antiquities already in mind?
Yeah, it was conceived, and also in our case it's even more different, because here you still have some, let's say, even if some pieces went out, but you still have some houses with important collection of paintings or statuary or everything. Venice, as you know, fell, the Republic of Venice fell in 1797, and let's say that Venice until 1940, 1950 was not a rich city. So let's say that we don't have an important private collection at home. We don't have even one. So it was a good idea to show to everybody that those palaces, that we have plenty of them, they were full of whatever you have in a museum around the world. So, like here. And that's true. and if you see the date of the acquisition, it's all 1840, 1850. It's exactly when we were starving. So, so we still have the beautiful palaces, but they are empty. So they have something, but not that kind of old masters or antiquity. So it was a good way to show to everybody that what it was a private noble house in the 16th century. This one was even a little bit more special because of the statues, but...
All of these reconstructive exhibitions, I guess, are about trying to not freeze the collection at a moment in time, but they're all trying to reconstruct the collection at one particular moment in its biography. You know, if we think about collections as dynamic, as, you know, often moving between different properties, you know, expanding and contracting, but you've all had to focus on sort of one sort of climax moment, as it were. what is the moment in the history of the collection that each of these points to? Is it the moment in which the sale catalogue, sort of what Strawberry Hill is in 1842? Is it what it was in 1779? I'm just curious, what's the singular historical moment that you've reproduced here?
Well, in this case, we have this will, who's very precise. So we have the description of the 120 statues that he gave to the state of Venice, and they also have a stamp in lead. Every statue has one. So it's you cannot make errors, let's say, because they are really there. And we have a little bit of interpretation about where to put them, some of them, because we know, for example, the last series of big busts, they were upstairs, the last order, let's say, and the big one, there are 3, and they can only stay in the niches. Also, we have a drawing by Zuccari, who's at the British Museum, even this, and it depicted the room in 1580, so we have some indication about where, but so in general, we have done like a compromise of, let's say, consistent work of try to say left and right, this is better here, better there, make them talk also was very funny. Yeah.
And as far as Houghton was concerned, we had documents. So the document is the first, the source, or whether drawings or inventories, and we had both in this case, some of which were discovered quite recently. So it was actually the best way. But then authenticity is what people are looking for. I mean, we are, and the public also, because then it rings true to the time. It becomes a time capsule, and there's something fascinating to see something that hasn't changed. I mean, all of us have this quest. Whenever you're interested in history, you want to know. Pompeii is another great example. I mean, there's a beautiful exhibition at the Ashmolean, but it's magical to think that this is actually how it was just before the eruption of the Vesuvius.
And is the eruption of Vesuvius in this instance the death of Walpole? I mean, is it's sort of the collection not added to after?
But yes, that's an
1742?
aspect. But the other aspect is the fact that the collection, the house remained in the family ever since, so it was untouched, and it wasn't lived in for over 100 years. So and the fact it's preserved in its original condition is also remarkable. And that happened also with the Hermitage, because the Hermitage remained, the collection of Catherine remained more or less untouched. So that's the magic about it. And then I forgot to mention before that seeing also pictures in a context that was really sort of the time, is also with the furniture, with the sconces, with the textiles, that also adds to the texture of the experience. And I think the public is very sensitive to
domestic,
that. Yes, the
domestic, I mean, it's
and transforms the pictures from the museum context.
Yes, because the museum context can be a bit sort of impersonal sometimes, and it's and intimidating as a result. Whereas when you enter a house, it doesn't matter how grand, you just feel, there's a bed, So it's I think you become closer to the works of art.
Also, this, I think, we didn't mention it before, about the importance of this kind of reconstruction. And I think also from an art historical point of view is the fact that we are nowadays we are used to National Museum, and also the ratio behind the display is often chronological, of course. But in this case, we have the opportunity through this reconstruction to actually perceive what was the relation to the visual arts in other centuries. In this case, we have, I mean, the Grimani reconstruction is really a lucky opportunity to reconstruct that, something that was conceived in the 16th century. If you think, we think about also all the grand tourist diaries, information that, these descriptions that are so rich, so touching also, the opportunity to see the recreation or such a tribute with the antique statues is really, it's, as Thierry was saying, is a time capsule. I think from an emotional point of view, is also very instructive in a sense. I mean, it's...
Wearing my historian's hat for a moment, and I don't want to, the time capsule is a very alluring idea, but I suppose it is worth thinking about the limits of that kind of return to the past, or that authenticity as well. And I suppose one of the things which makes it not authentic in fully ways is that I'd be interested if you could reflect a little bit about what you couldn't put back in. You know, what is incomplete in this reconstruction? Because there are numerous things, both works of art that have been lost, but also, I guess, the kind of cultural meaning of certain works of art that you can't recapture, even when you put the things back on the wall. And I also am interested in this question of attributions, especially with sort of Houghton. It was great, but actually, what Robert Walpole thought these pictures were is now quite different from what we think they are. And I suppose you're not trying to hide that dissonance or that disjunct. No. So there are limits to sort of the time capsule.
Actually, it went both ways, actually. Because there were works of art, indeed, that have been deattributed, that were in the Walpole collection, but the others were reattributed. And one of the most significant ones is the Velázquez, the portrait of Pope Innocent X, which now is in Washington, D.C., and it's been for about 30 or 40 years regarded as a second-tier version, or not even version, sort of studio version of Velázquez. And when I re-examined it sort of quite carefully, and also looked at the provenance and the research on the X-rays, and it was clear to me that this was actually a work, an autograph work, and so the exhibition has allowed that work to reappear as an original work by Velázquez, and the retrospective the exhibition at the Grand Palais sort of confirmed it, and it wasn't sort of so that was a beautiful, and also pictures which had disappeared, that we had lost in the inventory, reappeared at Houghton, that we didn't realize were part of the collection. So.
I think authenticity is not really the main aspect in this kind of reconstruction, and the fact, I mean, obviously, if talking about Horace Walpole, I know that the subtitle is masterpieces, and it's not exactly, I mean, yes, there are a few objects and works of art that are masterpieces, but Walpole was a compulsive collector of many, many different objects, some major, some very minor. In any case, of course, I mean, as a curator, one has to make a choice, especially for financial, for the financial aspects, because it would be fantastic to be able to have a green card and just go everywhere and have billions of vitrines. So this is one aspect. The important thing is to make a selection that makes sense in situ, and as we were saying before, I mean, try to find some kind of symmetry and recreate analogies or dialogues between objects and locations that make the narrative understandable.
And when you are lucky to have a beautiful piece back.
This is obviously makes.
If you
Absolutely.
can, there is something like, no.
So I asked,
this one.
there we go.
Yep.
I asked our panelists
this is
to
the
actually
thing.
bring in a slide showing a piece that they were particularly proud of having tracked down and acquired. So,
So this is a very interesting story about this table. There were two tables, and this one is made in Rome at the end of 16th century, and another one was made in Florence at the same time. And so for sure, and the other one is with the coat of arms of the Grimani, so the Doge, the Patriarcha, the Prime Minister, and the Cardinal. So they were in the Grimani house until 1829 and made it for Patriarcha Grimani in the, let's say, 1590. And we know that the last of the Grimani of that branch he sold to Lord Warwick. And 5 years ago they were in auction at Sotheby's, both of them. So I called Sotheby's, Maritavella, and I said, well, will you please help me? And because I would like to have one of the two, or maybe two. I tried two, but I said no. It's always good to try. And so finally he put me in contact with the new owner of the table, and so it was it was amazing when the big slab of stone, I mean it's quite big, and arrived back to one of the rooms that probably it was, we don't know which one, but you know, the room was so beautiful, it was perfect there. And recently I was in New York, and I went for a cocktail to see friends of friends, and I opened the door of this entrance, and I saw the other table there. Wow. I had a heart attack, almost. And I said, May. So now I'm working, because this one, I have to give the table back in December, this one. But the exhibition will stay for 2 years. So the statues will stay there for 2 years. So I'm gonna try to replace this with the other one. We'll see.
Out of interest, was there other furniture in the tribuna?
No furniture. There were other statues on the floor, and now we have that kind of three-dimensional things that you put here and you watch, you know, that kind of things for young people. That, but yeah, there were some warriors, some full-size statues, and they are not in the Marciana Library, they are in the Archaeological Museum. So I'm working on it to have them back. They're gonna come soon.
Silvia, do you want to do your own eagle has landed moment? That's quite literally.
No, the story of the eagle is just, I mean, because it's among, I mean, as I was saying, the quality and the size of the objects we borrow back, it was really, there were many different typologies. But obviously the eagle became suddenly one of the main attractions. This eagle came from the Albani collection. Walpole wrote many letters about buying. He spent a lot of money for it. Then the eagle never arrived in London, then finally arrived, but was damaged. So it's all about this eagle. And suddenly, I mean, it's true that in order to have it, it became one of the main attractions for the exhibition and the marketing campaign. Then we had some few problems, and at some point we thought the eagle was not coming, and so it was awful because it was on all the posters. Like I wrote a piece for Apollo, it was about the eagle, and I was like, okay, and then we were lucky. But the eagle was also representative of what I was saying before about Walpole being the father of Neo-Gothic, but also being a very a collector of Roman antiquities. And in fact, when he commissioned this portrait to Reynolds, and at the time Strawberry Hill was really already a fact. I mean, was a villa that was well visited by many people, but he decided to pose for the portrait with the eagle, which has a meaning. I mean, it is him trying to convey a message about the origin of his taste and his background as a conoscente. So it's an interesting kind of iconic object. And the other interesting thing is that normally the eagle should have been in the gallery, but for technical reason, I mean, in the past, during Walpole's time, it was in the gallery, but nowadays it is impossible. Actually, engineers told us that if we put the
floor will collapse.
Yes, exactly. So it's interesting. I mean, there were things that we thought would fit in the places Walpole, and actually there was a painting that was too big to be displayed over the door, which was strange because in all the drawings it's there. So these open other questions, but it's just to.
Thierry, do you want to tell us about one of your feats? Yours is there.
Yes. So we're here in Sasko-Selo, or the Catherine Palace outside St. Petersburg. So it's one of the summer palaces. And you can see above the staircase there's a picture which looks tiny, but it's actually quite large. And it's a painting by Luca Giordano of the Judgment of Paris. And that was there was a pendant to another picture in the Walpole collection. And it was a very important picture, enlarged as well, in the green room that we saw earlier, the Carlo Manata room. So, but I realized that it was going to be problematic to ask for this picture from the museum. And in fact, it wasn't there always, but it came after the war when they reconstructed the palace. They thought that would be sort of that would fit nicely in the wonderful molding. And so I asked the director, who of course sort of said no straight away. You realize it's impossible, and also the staircase. I mean, it's one of the most visited buildings. I mean, palaces in Russia or museums. So it's closing this would be nearly impossible, and costly, and so forth. So it was a bad start. But she was very nice and very supportive, and she lent me other pictures because they had been placed there. So finally, I managed to find a sponsor who said, well, it's an interesting project. And so they agreed to give it a bit of money towards the restoration of one of their salons. And then we realized that we could do it in a day, just. So a scaffold was erected, you can see here, and the painting was removed, but we replaced it by a photograph. And of course, at this distance, you can't really tell the difference. So the moment, one of the great moments of Houghton is at the opening. The director came for the opening, and I spotted her sort of contemplating the picture on the wall of the Carlo Manata room. And I said, so what do you think? I said, it's wonderful. And I'm glad I said yes. And as a result, which is also very good news, is the picture now, which has returned to Russia, is now sort of on the wall of the Catherine Palace, not on the ceiling. And we left the photograph up there. So but you're the only ones to know. So,
Are there many?
No, just that one.
Can I ask, I mean, it's very interesting, the range of artworks that you've kind of restored. Did you find when you pulled them together, and having made this great logistical feat to do so, was it sometimes difficult to inspire and excite 21st century audiences about some of this material, in the sense that Murata is a name which I guess for many visitors to Houghton was not familiar. Some of the Walpole material, as you say, is extremely kind of diverse and quite learned and quite scholarly. Equally, some of the Roman material is unfamiliar. I mean, did you find that there was an effort to try and communicate this material, or actually putting it back in the context in itself gave it an extra allure?
In a way, I think it's in a funny way. I think having the context helps a lot, because you can weave the story of the collectors, of the family, of the tragedies, of the happiness, and the public reacts very well to that. Of course, it's always better if you're able to tell the story yourself, or someone is able to. So a guide or is always useful. But I think actually, on the contrary, it really helps the public to see works of art in the context, and then it becomes alive, much less theoretical. Yeah, and then yes, okay. Yeah.
No, it's more intimate also.
Yes,
because I mean it's
personal.
And I think the context, the reconstruction element is really essential.
Yeah, and also, it's also part of, you show not only a masterpiece or almost a masterpiece, but in the context. And so people are dreaming about to go in like a capsule, they'd love to have that kind of things where they were, whatever they, object, paintings, whatever, but it's another experience from a cold museum.
Can I ask, how does the digital fit into that? Because you were suggesting, Toto, that you're actually using headsets and things to kind of reconstruct the things that are absent from the display?
Yes, yes. You can wear this kind of things, like the one give you a bad perception of the floor. You feel like drunk. But in this case also, because they say, probably it's going to be dangerous for the floor, you can collapse down. So, and there were 3 big warriors on the floor, and some other slab of stone and pieces of marble. It was really like a cabinet de curiosité, of stones. And so I was not able to put them back. But with this, they took this kind of 3-dimensional, high-quality pictures, and so you wear this kind of things, and you can see them there. So it's quite, it's beautiful to explain even more about it.
And it doesn't detract from the intimacy, from what you're saying. If anything, it just deepens the
No, also because
experience.
I don't want more than 15 people in the room. So they're waiting before. There is some sofas there. They sit there. Thanks to him, he designed the sofa. And no, it's nice because if you are more than 15 in that beautiful room, the perception is not nice. So we have that kind of filters, and students, before they're there waiting on the door, they explain to the people what is going to happen inside. So it's even more intimate.
If we stand back from your own individual projects, I suppose just a penultimate question, do you think that the boom for these reconstructive exhibitions is going to grow and grow in years to come, in that what is happening across the sector, that there is more and more of this desire to kind of reconstruct either iconic shows or sort of original collections? What's driving this? And
Well, he's the one who inspired me, because I went
Me
with
too.
him.
The Morel effect.
He's the responsible for
He's the responsible for.
Yeah, because I went with him to see Houghton Hall, and I said, well, we have to do something about Venetian collection, that we don't have them anymore. So and now we are thinking about a collection that it was in Venice. Where is the office of the mayor, by the way, the Palazzo Farsetti, and the majority of this beautiful collection of terracotta by Bernini, Rusconi, and all of them. How many pieces? Many, no?
60.
60, yeah. They are at the Hermitage. Yeah. So,
Cultural diplomacy
we
is at
are
work.
we are thinking about it to do it together. So
Yes, but to answer your question, I would say yes, and I think we should. I mean, it should be the exclusive way of displaying works of art, but I think it's certainly a way that has a lot of virtues. And I forgot on the point that you were raising before, how does it sort of illuminate sort of the works of art or collections or things? Well, you learn a lot. And in Houghton, I remember there was a little surprise. Is in one of the bedrooms, I mean, there was the Poussin, the Holy Family, which is one of the masterpieces of the collection. And it has a specific format. It's actually a vertical picture. And I wasn't quite sure where he was originally. And then I remember there was a lovely sort of Kent frame above one of the chimney pieces in Houghton. And I said, let's measure it. So I measured it, and it was exactly the dimension of the Poussin. So with the authorization of the Hermitage, we decided to try to place the Poussin in that frame. It was its frame. So 250 years later, it came back exactly in its frame, which had been left at Houghton. And then, once it was there, it's only actually 2 months later, did I notice that some of the carvings, the cherubs, and also painted sort of ceiling, were actually interacting with the picture. But that you couldn't notice until the picture was back in its original location. So that tells you that it's actually, and then of course all the things that get discovered. I mean, the provenance, some works are discovered, or yours. It's always it's a good stimulus for research.
And do you think research is one of the things that's driving this, in the sense that it's because more work is being done on the art market historically that people are more and more aware of the importance of these private collections that are still sort of floating around in various other institutions?
I mean, now, I mean, there are so many new areas of research in art history. If we think about gender, for instance, now, for instance, at National Gallery, they are doing things on women artists. So there are many trajectories, and of course, I think exhibition reflect these new trajectories in research. So yes, provenance, art market, collecting are part of these. And when it's possible, when we have records, documents, drawings, and the buildings, the palazzi are still there, it's fantastic to actually push for this kind of.
And coming back to understand works of art, I mean, I was very fortunate to be people of Francis Haskell and his patrons and painters. It tells you that if you know a bit about the origin of the works of art and the patrons and who commissioned them, then you can and the links between those artists, those patrons. I mean, you understand much more about the works, and therefore they become more meaningful to you. I think I see art history as a way of increasing your pleasure, not decreasing it, and it enhances your perception of the works.
But I think that all I would say is that enhancement, I agree with you, I suppose, is about reading the objects forward in time, not just backwards. I think it's important that we don't fetishize the sense that this painting meant most at one particular moment in the past, because often, and even with the Houghton paintings, it's extraordinary. Their subsequent life in Russia has also added a whole host of other associations which are still very interesting and, in a way, kind of very engaging, I suppose. My final question is, and this is just a cheeky personal one, if you had, if money was no object and, time was no object, if you could reconstruct a historic collection that has subsequently been dispersed, do you have, if the pieces were there and you had the time to do it, is there a historic collection that you think it would be wonderful to bring that back together?
Well, yes. There is an English artist, by the way, and now it's public. He bought recently a beautiful palazzo in Venice, Palazzo Manfrin, that it was for sale for 4 years, and nobody wanted to buy because you cannot make an hotel, thank God, because it's a beautiful 18th century palazzo with beautiful neoclassic frescoes everywhere. And the palazzo was redecorated at the end of the 18th century for Girolamo Manfrin, who was one of the last richest men of the Republic of Venice, just on time. At the time, he has the monopoly of tobaccos, so he became like billionaires in a few years. But he was conscious about, then at the time, nouveau riche, to be accepted, they must became intellectual. It's not like now that they do other things. Talking about somebody who owns television in Italy. So he put it together, 450, a masterpiece of the time, but really from early paintings like Gothic and to Renaissance and Baroque and Rococo until Neoclassic. And because the collection, let's say, is a late collection in the sense of end of 18th century, beginning of 19th century, it was intact until mid-19th century with a catalog also, so the people could go there every Monday. They can ring the bell. It's the old guide of Venice. You have to go to see the monthly collection. And at the end of 19th century, the collection was dispersed. But a big part of this collection, thank God, was bordered by the Galleria dell'Accademia. So the Vecchia by Giorgione, the Tempesta by Giorgione, the St. George by Mantegna, they are all Manfrini. So let's say that the 24 most important pieces of the Accademia Museum come from the Manfrini collection, and you have many here too. I'm going to ask somebody.
Yes.
And the idea is because Sir Kapoor will restore this house, and he will not only show his own pieces, but he want to do something like for the city, and this will be another beautiful chapter of the history of private collection.
Wow. That's quite feasible. Silvia?
Now, thinking about London, one collection that I always have really, I loved actually, is the Charles Townley collection, the marbles that are now kept at the British Museum. Many are in storage, but Charles Townley, together with Walpole, for instance, was inspirational for for John Soane and the now very beautiful John Soane Museum. So, and Townley's house, which was constructed for the collection, is in Mayfair, still exists and was restored, is now private. And we have Zoffany's famous painting, which obviously is a bit fictional, but it doesn't matter. And so I think would be, I mean, in terms of London, this would be a very interesting reconstruction. Yeah? Yes. To think so, Thierry. The Orleans collection, I'm kidding. No, yes, there are so many collections that would be fantastic to reconstruct, but in terms of
there are so many. I mean, I mean, so in a way, it's a matter of interpretation and a matter of slightly sort of pragmatic, and not all collections deserve to be back together, and only if their reconstruction sort of means something. I think it's a good project. Otherwise, it may not be valid. But one should never forget that all museums are formed thanks to collection. And National Gallery is a good example. But it's and therefore there's something quite. So it's
an act of justice in a way for
yes,
to spotlight that.
Yeah, exactly. So there's one I'm thinking of, and we'll see if the French collection, which I'd like to put together, the Crozat.
Wow.
Oh, wow. We can but hope that's a scoop for a future exhibition that we have here. But we have
about its early days, but it's anyway. That's an idea. And Pierre Crozat is totally unknown to most of the public, but Pierre Crozat was one of the key collectors at the time of the Régence, sort of after Louis XIV and during the reign of, and after during the reign of Louis XV. And his collection, when he died, he decided to give half. He didn't have any children, so he had nephews. So he decided to give half to the poor, and the other half to his nephews. And cleverly, the half he gave to the poor were his drawings and some objects and intaglios, and those were auctioned and the money given to the church. But the rest, all the pictures were given to his nephews, who kept it diligently and added to it. And it became one of the places. I mean, their house became one of the places you visited in the late 18th century France. And when the last nephew died, Diderot, who had been, had a good relationship with Catherine the Great, suggested her to buy it. And so she did exactly the same as she did with Walpole, except it was before, it was 1771, and she bought the entire collection of pictures. And that formed really the nucleus of the Hermitage. And some of the best pictures in the Hermitage are Crozat.
Walpole bought Horace.
Yes,
The famous armor of Francis I from the Crozat collection, of course, wasn't Francis I, but this doesn't matter. And he displayed it in the hall, so it was, and now it's in a German obscure. No, it's not obscure, but it's a small museum in Germany. So just
with the promise of these future exhibitions, I'm going to pull the session to a halt. But please join me in thanking our speakers for a kind of fantastic, interesting discussion.